Hi, I'm Adam Searle. Here at Locus Harmony, I want to help you find your happiness. That's why in this video, I'm talking about why should we be mindful? Why should we be present? Okay, so you've probably heard about mindfulness or presence, being present. What I am referring to when I'm talking about it here and why we should be mindful, why we should be present, what's the point, what are the benefits, does it help? I'm talking about a conscious effort to slow down, just maybe take a moment. That moment can last for a while, and you can take that practice of being present and mindful with you throughout the day, or you might just come to it from time to time. So that's what I'm talking about that's what I'm explaining here, like why is that beneficial and why you might want to do that. Being present and being mindful tends to have other connotations with it. So for instance, the practice of mindfulness might have us be very aware of the physical things that we're doing in that moment. So if you're walking, be aware of the physical steps that you're taking and the feeling, or if you're eating, it might make you aware of the taste and thinking about that. Presence goes hand in hand with that, but there's also something else to presence, which is the presence itself. So the presence of presence. That's a feeling that you can connect with and be aware of, that you carry through all situations. So at times I think being mindful, it can almost feel pointless if the mind is coming in. The mind, I have found, at least mine, there's a kind of ongoing effort by the mind, the thinking mind, the thoughts that revolve around our mind. There's an ongoing effort there to take us out of the present moment. If you ever take the time to really just be with your thoughts and observe them, I have found doing that what the mind does is it's always either in the past or in the future, or some imaginary made up future. It's when the mind is coming in like that with thoughts and maybe trying to rationalize and put logic to being present, that it can feel pointless, because maybe it's taking you straight away into the future. Maybe, there's something we should be doing, that we need to be doing. We should go and do this thing, and rather than being where you are in that moment. Now, aside from it feeling pointless sometimes, if you can get past that and actually maybe separate yourself from that thought and take the time to be present, sometimes it can be really a hard thing to do, because if you're going through something that is, emotionally challenging, remaining present can be even harder, not just because the emotions might overwhelm you and you'll lose that presence, but also because, there's the other side of it, which is that you have to accept those feelings that are there. It can be really hard to stay present when we're going through something negative, because it's an additional incentive to not be present. So maybe I should give you some of the benefits instead of listing all the reasons why it's hard. Okay, so I don't really want this to, watch as a video where I'm trying to sell mindfulness, because it's such a personal thing to the individual to be present, and it's quite a special thing in that way. But with that said, there are some benefits that I do just want to list out, and the first one of those is when we are present. So when we're aware of the present moment, we become more aware of ourselves, and not necessarily our inner selves in terms of the presence that's underneath, although that is something that happens. But what I'm referring to is the ideas that we have about ourselves, so what we often refer to as ourself. For instance, the thoughts and the thought patterns and behavior patterns and emotional patterns that we go through, these become more obvious to us rather than us just acting them out and just being those. Having this conscious awareness of the present moment, you will start to gain wisdom in a sense, because you will see things that you are doing on a repeated scale. So it might be as simple as a thought that's going around in your head, and maybe it's just coming up 20 times, 100 times a day, and you're not really thinking about that normally if you're not present. Or well, you are, but you're not kind of meta thinking about it. You're not thinking that you're thinking about it, you just think about it. Whereas when you have this presence, you might say to yourself, oh, look, that thought keeps coming up, rather than fully identifying with it. Now, that's the first sort of benefit, in my opinion, that mindfulness has, and meditation as well, really. And mindfulness and presence, really, and meditation, they're all the same thing. They're just different ways of thinking about the same thing, which is being in the present moment and accepting it. Of course, there's different types of meditation that have different aims potentially, but in my experience, that's really what it's all about. And even the practice of mindfulness, as I explained it earlier, where you're being aware of each step that you're taking, that's a form of meditation. Meditation really just means, to me, being present. So once we become aware of these recurring, let's say, thoughts, because that's the example I gave, but it can be anything, emotions, it gives us an opportunity to change those things. And whereas before that moment, those emotions, whatever they are, and those thoughts, they're in a sense in control of you and your happiness, right? Keeping with the theme of the channel. But once you become aware of them, it gives you this power to change them, and this power for you to take control of your happiness. It's not always as simple as like, oh, I've realized it. Although sometimes it is. Sometimes all you need is to see what you're doing to realize how silly it is sometimes. Like Eckhart Tolle, I mentioned him in other videos. I think he's great, but he talks about drama, for instance. I think it's a good example that comes to mind, and how drama is, if you're not, when you realize that drama is drama and you label it as that, it just becomes something silly that you can laugh about. So what that does there, as I mentioned, it gives us this wisdom, this insight into how we are behaving, our own behaviors, and that in turn gives us this power to make a choice and to really see how things are working. Okay, so another thing that mindfulness, presence, this practice of being accepting and aware in the present moment, another thing that does, and why you might want to do it, and this, these things, they don't happen instantly necessarily, although they can, as I just said, but sometimes they come with practice. So sometimes, and the reason I made this video is that sometimes when things aren't going great, you need a kind of a reason, if you like, or like a reassurance, some way to reassure yourself that you're doing the right thing. And that's kind of what I want this video to be, which is just a few things. If you're not in a great place and you're feeling a bit lost, or even if you're in a great place and you're just wondering about mindfulness, either way it works. But I just think that knowing the benefits, if you are in that bad place, can help you to put one foot in front of the other and say, okay, so I do feel bad. I'm going to stay present though, because I know that it has these benefits. So the next benefit that it kind of gives is that it helps grant a perspective. Now, that's kind of similar to the other point in that I said, you can take a step back from what you're doing. But what I think presence really does, and what I mean by perspective in this regard, is that it puts things into perspective. So kind of like the example with drama, and how when you see drama as drama, it just becomes something a bit silly rather than this serious problem that you've got. it puts things into perspective because you realize all that there is the present moment. And again, that's not something that might happen instantly, but that does come, and you have these moments the more you practice it, and you realize, on the way back from a meditation retreat, this is a good example that I like to share. I was driving in my car along the motorway, and there's other people in their cars driving, and people tend to go quite fast on motorways, and I think it was a bit trafficy, but I remember looking at the faces of other drivers, and there was some level of guessing on my part. There always is. I don't know exactly, obviously, what that person is feeling, but relating to past experiences and people that I know who drive and that kind of thing, you can kind of see in people this franticness to get to the destination. Now, I had this kind of moment of realization because I was present at the time, which is after a long meditation retreat. You really settle into that, and it stays with you quite strongly after these retreats. But anyway, I could see the other drivers and this franticness to kind of get to somewhere else. Now, the realization there that I had was just like, where are they trying to get to? Because there's kind of this confusion, if you like, between space and time almost in the mind. We think that we want to be in another space, but actually what we're doing, what we're thinking without realizing it, is that we want to be in another time, which is impossible. You can't be in another time, but you don't get to another space quicker by refusing the current time, if that kind of makes sense. It's this weird, I hope that makes sense, because it's kind of, like I say, it's a kind of this realization, and sometimes they're a bit tricky to put into words, but it's this idea of trying to get somewhere else in time, trying to get out of the present moment, which is always here. There's just one continuous present moment. So in that sense, the point that I'm trying to make here is that being present can grant that perspective. Hopefully that example made some sense. Okay, so another thing. I said earlier about how sometimes it can be really hard if you're going through a bad time to remain present, because it's an additional distraction. Your mind already doesn't want to be present. It already wants to think about the past, the future, whatever. But when you continue to practice presence through meditation, mindfulness, just being present, connecting with the presence underneath, whatever your practice is, but when you practice that, the good moments become much better. That's kind of the first part of it. And the bad moments, if you like, although being present, you do kind of less and less label things in that way, but the bad moments aren't as bad. The more you practice mindfulness, you get this perspective over moments. Again, it's a different kind of perspective, but I mean, everything ties into this idea of perspective, I guess, which I hadn't realized, but seems to be a running theme. It gives you the perspective over good and bad moments while you're in them. So the good moments, when they're there, you really appreciate them for what they are, because rather than wishing it was something else, or like noticing the bad points about it, or trying to hold on to it and as it's passing, and in that way kind of creating this tension and almost like some form of suffering from that, you don't do any of that with the good moments. You're just there, present in them, and the more you do this, the more you're present, the more it amplifies these good moments. Like I can't really express to you, because if you haven't experienced it, there's no way for me to convey it. Like, there's no way to explain how beneficial being present, truly present, can be until you've experienced it. And it doesn't take drugs to do that. All you need to do is practice being in the present moment. Just accept what's there as it is. And the flip side of that is that bad moments, when they occur, a lot of the suffering that can come with those moments is caused by our resistance to them, by us wishing that they were gone, that we were in another situation, whatever it is. And regardless of that, you observe them as they pass. So even if there is still that tension coming from a part of you, you accept that, and you're just accepting of what is there because you're present, you're in the moment as it is. So, the bad, as I mentioned earlier, if you're in a bad place and you're just starting out, that can be tricky to do that, but the bad will get less and less and less, and the better gets better and better and better in that way. It's a weird thing to talk about and to discuss intellectually, because it brings, again, when you do it and talk about it and think about it in this way, it brings back into it this kind of labeling rather than just being present. So keep that in mind, and when you're practicing presence, don't have an end goal in mind, because, well, that's the same thing, isn't it? The whole point is just to be present however it is, not so that you can feel better, if that makes sense. Yeah, so I guess the theme has arisen here just through talking, that what being present really gives you is perspective, and it gives you a perspective over the kind of construct of self. I spoke about that in the last video, so I won't go into it too much, but the idea that the thoughts and the ideas that we carry about ourselves, and I guess the emotions and this self that kind of self-perpetuates, if you like, without us interacting with it, more just being an observer, which is ultimately what we are and what we need to accept anyway. This was meant to make things simpler, but I probably just made them more confusing there. But the point being that being present grants us perspective, and these behaviors and these thoughts that might otherwise kind of run us, we can get distance from them. In particular, the emotions, where we can see, oh, that was a bit silly, why was I doing that? And there's something else that comes from presence that I've experienced. And again, it's something else that is really hard to kind of convey. So I hope that maybe it's coming across that you can feel what I'm trying to say, because there's no real way to explain it. But I'll give it a go anyway. When you're present, it kind of sets off this chain reaction in a positive direction, which is that the more that you're present and realize that you can have everything you want and everything you need just by being present, and that everything is already perfect the way that it is, the more that you are present and the more that you enjoy being present. It's happened to me in different ways through different understandings, but there's levels to that. I'm guessing, and there's probably a lot more that I haven't experienced. I mean, if life's taught me anything, it's that there's always something new to experience, and you don't know what that is. You can't predict it. If you think you know, you're wrong. So yeah, I hope this video has helped if you were wondering why you should be present. I've gone on a few little windy tours there. I always have this debate, so to speak, whether I should make these videos more succinct, or whether the kind of more free flow guided train of thought, train of presence as I try to project it and share. Maybe which one do you prefer? If you let me know, that would be great. So drop some comments. Tell me if you prefer. Maybe I did some quicker bullet points. I know those videos might get more popular. I'm not too bothered about being super popular. It's more about what you feel you get the most worth from. What I want to share is what I've learned, and I want people to understand that and grow themselves. And so yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.